Hi Tabitha, thank you so much for having us here today at Mediation Amsterdam. Your view is absolutely gorgeous. We have a very straightforward question for you. How can creativity help parties in a conflict?
That's an interesting question. I think creativity is very important because people tend to use a lot of, excuse the word, verbal diarrhea. They want to attack the other person with their position, their viewpoint, their arguments. And at some point, I mean, it's good to release some of those words that need to be said, but it's also good to be invited to look at things from a different perspective. And people are often struggling to hear the other perspective, but then sometimes you can invite them through visual facilitation to look at things differently. And one of the things I often use is I draw a 6, but if you turn the 6 around, it will be a 9. So what I do is I invite people to look at things from each other's positions, because they think initially that they are having a situation with incompatible truths, and they think each person is wrong about their truth, because there can only be one truth, right? So by using the 6 and the 9, I invite them to look at things like, so depending on where you stand and how you look at things look different, and there may be more than one truth here at the table. And by understanding, you're not necessarily having to combat the other person in who is right, but you just have to accept that you both see things from a different perspective. It creates space, because it's no longer a personal collision of truth and lies. It's a fact of life that people see things different from their perspective. Additionally, what I sometimes do is I invite people to look at things from a wider perspective. So what I see in conflicts, take for example a situation in healthcare or in any team, where people have to work together. People think that, they're in a conflict, so obviously they have a different way of looking at things. They think that the other person is like a cactus who doesn't want to work together at all, with the other person who's a solitary creature in the desert and who doesn't give shit about what the other person needs or what the team needs. And then the other person may feel that their co-worker is like someone who needs a Siamese twin-like situation, who wants to hold on, hold hands, do everything together. And from those perspectives, they both feel like they suffocate. They get really upset. So it's like, there's a cactus and I wanna be able to talk with that person, but they don't give a shit. And then the other person feels like, I'm suffocated because someone wants to hold me that tight that I cannot have any autonomy anymore. I don't feel like I have the space to breathe or make my own decisions or have my own view on how the work should be done. So what I will do is I will take a piece of paper and I will draw the cactus on one hand and the Siamese twin on the other hand, and I ask people, where do you think you are? And usually people find out that they're not on the end of the extremes. Now obviously one wants more autonomy, the other one wants perhaps more collaboration, more intense cooperation, but they don't find that they are both on the other side of the extremes. So you invite them to put their positions down, and then they find out that the gap is not that wide. And it's very helpful to do that on a piece of paper, because it gives people time to breathe. It gives them time to mark their position. It invites them to think about themselves, and it also visualizes where's the other person. And it really helps, again, to stop that verbal attack of you want that, that's not how we should be doing things, that's not how a team works, that's not how we can get any closer to our company's goals or to what the patient needs or whatever the working context is. So that's the second one. Then a third thing which I've been doing is, it's a bit similar to the cactus and the Siamese twins, but people sometimes seem to think that the other person has a totally different view on what is important, what are the leading principles that this company should be about. And if you take, for example, I often mediate in healthcare or in school situations, in education, so people think that the board of directors is totally obsessed with what does the healthcare insurance company want, or what do the people with the money want. And they feel, the nurses or the doctors or the teachers feel like, no, the only thing that is really relevant here is what does the student need or what does the patient need. And both of them feel prejudiced by the other person's understanding of the reality. So the board of director feels like the nurses or the teaching staff doesn't get that we need finances to keep this company, to keep this organization running. And on the other hand, the directors feel like, no, the nurses feel like the directors don't get that the importance is that we have happy customers. If we don't have happy customers, if we don't have happy students, they're going to leave and then we will not have any financing at all anymore. And by literally putting, and sometimes I just use cups on the table or I just write something like, okay, here's the money, here's the societal goal, the patient's healthcare or the student's school happiness, satisfaction. Where do you think the other person is? And often people will again take those extreme positions looking at the other. And then if you ask them like, okay, can you now, can you, the director, or can you, the representative of the staff, say where you really are, or whether you understand the position of the other person, then they find out that they're not that divided as they thought they were. So obviously the teachers understand that money is needed to keep the office running. And obviously the nurses understand that in the Netherlands we have an aging population, so healthcare costs are going up. I mean, the news is writing about it, you can read about it. So people often understand much more of the other person's position. And by visualizing the differences and visualizing the potential to work together or to share a common view on things, that really helps clarify the air. And from a clarified air, or clearing up the air, people feel that there's space to move on.
Tabitha, any other examples you would like to share with us?
There are two things that I do. Usually when things get stuck, or when people seem to be really obsessed with trying to convince the other person. One of them is that sometimes I even invite people to change chairs or to stand up, take a position, and then invite them to switch. And say like, okay, if you look at this, and I know I'm stretching you, if you stand in the other person's shoes, can you explain what you think is most important to that person? What does he or she need from a solution? So you really invite them and you enforce them, even though they don't feel empathy, or they don't want to understand the other person's position. But as a mediator, they feel like, well, there's some authority here, like they're asking me, they probably know what they're doing. So, okay, I will try to explain what I think is most important for that person. And that really helps people understand that they have been listened to. Or it helps people to see that they have not listened at all to what the other person really wants. And then you have an opening to share, but what is it that you really want? But it is a tricky one, and I wouldn't do it in the first session, and I don't do it in all the sessions, but sometimes when you feel like people are really stuck and they really need to hear that the other person has heard them, or they really need to be forced to open up, or something needs to happen, because if I just leave them at a table, throwing words at each other, throwing arguments, explaining their position over and over and over again, and nobody is getting any closer, then I will do something. And something even more radical, but I've done it at some point, is I would use a piece of paper, and that's when I feel like people are reluctant to take any responsibility or accept that they have a share in a conflict. Because in my opinion, conflict is not about one person being wrong and the other person being right. It's not about wrong and right, or persons even. It's about the chemistry between people. It's about what they have created together that somehow is no longer functional or no longer working for them. So it's about the interaction between two people. It's not so much about person A or person B. And what I will do is I will give them a piece of paper and say like, can you point out, if this is the conflict, which part do you think is yours? And sometimes people will say like, well, I only take this bit of responsibility for the conflict. But in most cases, people will realize like, okay, well, two fighting, it must be 50-50, or there must be a bigger share of mine into this conflict than I initially was ready to accept. But obviously, this is the truth. So it's a bit of a radical one. You call people out on what are you ready to take as a responsibility for the fact that you are here now, that something has gone wrong in what you meant to achieve in your organization or in your corporation or in your business. But I've done it when I felt like people are reluctant to accept their own responsibility. And those are some of the creative options that I've been applying in conflict situations, in mediation.
And what about the parties? How can parties themselves be creative in a mediation process?
Well, if parties were able to be really creative and the solution was nearby, then probably they wouldn't have ended up in the mediation table, because I usually only get hired when things have gotten stuck. So I don't see a lot of creativity at the table. I do notice that once people are able or willing to, and sometimes their legal counsel will be able or willing to explain that they have some understanding for the other person's position, or that they will say, if I was on your side of the table, then probably I would also be resistant to discuss this or that option, or I do understand that everything that has happened has had an impact on your trust towards my client or towards me. That's usually some of the magic. Acknowledging that you have some understanding for the other person's position will help people feel like they can let go of some of the stress, let go of some of the resistance. And once some of the resistance and some of the stress or some of the anger is reduced, I usually see space, and then people are more willing to think in collaborative options. They are more willing to share things that they maybe have thought of but were not willing to put on the table because they didn't feel the other person deserved a new chance. So they'll be able to creatively look at other options rather than just cut the orange in the middle and both have half, or just keep on fighting about the whole orange. I think we all know, and the students following this course will know the story about the orange and Harvard negotiation. And I noticed that people are not able to see beyond the orange and beyond the 50-50 cut until there is some level of understanding and acknowledgement of the pain that the other person had. So my advice to parties who want to be creative, who want to find a way out, is like, show some empathy, acknowledge that you realize that the other person has been suffering from the situation, that you understand that they are reluctant to give up their position or whatever it is, but acknowledge it. And what I see as a common misunderstanding is that acknowledging the pain means you claim that you are responsible for the pain. But those are two very different things. If I say I understand that you have pain, or I understand that the situation has been this and this and this and this, and the impact on you has been that and that and that, that doesn't mean that you accept guilt for it. It simply means I understand, I acknowledge it, not I'm guilty. And I think that's a concept that a lot of parties are struggling with, and it would really help them. It would help them to be creative and to find a solution in common interest when they separate those two, guilt and acknowledgement, in order to have a better solution for both